is up, my fellow gamers? In today's video we got our best guide for the buffs. We got some pro tips as well. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing predecessor guides, tips, tricks, and live streams as well, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, if it helped you out at all. All right, so first up, we're going to be taking a look at the map while also going over this live with gameplay as well. First one we want to go over is the red buff. This is a monster that you can find in the jungle, and as a jungle player, in fact, this is the first buff that the game naturally takes you to with its tutorial. You just follow the arrow at the bottom as a jungle player. It directs you to take down that buff first. And what the red buff does is it gives you damage over time, and it also gives you a slow on your basic attacks as well. As a jungle player, most of the buffs that you're going to be taking down are fairly easy. They're not really too heavy in the damage. They're more just kind of tanky. You just got to sit there and just keep putting out damage on them over and over again. So that's why the game kind of recommends that you go after that red buff first. That way it'll be easier for you to take down the minions in the jungle to get lots of gold, and that way you can start powering up. Next buff we have is to the left of that. That is going to be the blue buff. Now this is pretty much very similar to the red buff, as you'll see a monster, but instead of the monster being red, the monster will be represented in blue, so that way you know it's the blue buff. This will give you mana regeneration, ability haste, and extra damage to minions and monsters. Minions being the creatures that go down the lanes, and the monsters being stuff like the different buffs or the ones that drop gold in the jungle. Now what ability haste does is it actually reduces your cooldowns, so that way you can spam your abilities faster. From my testing, around a 10-second cooldown while having this blue buff on will actually reduce it by almost up to 2 seconds. So instead of having to wait that full 10 seconds, it'll actually be faster, and you'll almost be able to spam it within 8. Depending on the hero you choose for jungle, the red buff or the blue buff can be the most important. So they kind of go hand in hand. Next up we have is the gold dot, and this is the gold buff. You'll just see a singular monster standing there, and he'll be kind of outlined in like this goldish glow, and all it does is give you extra gold. This is in the carry and support lane, so the 2-man lane. This is going to be the main buff that you're getting if you're playing a carry or support. One thing that I have to mention is the fact that when it comes to these buffs, whoever puts the last hit on these monsters gets the credit. So that's very, very important. So if you're over there, if you're tag teaming the gold buff and you want to get more gold to your carry, as a support, you may just want to help put some damage out, but don't actually get the kill shot. Also, on the flip side of this, you need to be careful, because if you start burning down that monster's health and the enemy sees you, they can pretty much come over, and if they get the kill shot on it, they get the gold, and you pretty much just help them out. So for my first pro tip is, as a carry and support lane, trying to get that gold buff is very important, because it gives you a lot more gold than, say, just like killing the minions. So you really want to only take it when you see the opponent back out. So you'll notice if one of their supports or their carries actually has to back to the base, and you notice you have the 2-on-1 advantage, that is a great time to go and take down that gold buff. In fact, that should be your main priority, is whenever you are outnumbering the enemy, whether it's 2v1 or 2v0, you immediately should be going for that gold buff, because it's very, very important. A lot of games I've been playing, I don't see people even utilize it enough. They kind of just don't think it's worth it, and they just kind of stay in their lane. And 100% you need to be going for that gold buff as a carry or support, because it helps you scale out and build your characters a lot faster. Moving on to the opposite side, we have the teal or the cyan dot color. This is going to be for your off laners. This is going to give you a combination of a bunch of different things. You're going to get XP, you're going to get a small amount of gold, you're going to get mana, and you're going to get health. So as a solo laner, this is important, because this helps you stay locked down in that lane and not have to back. One of the biggest problems that you will face as an offlaner is the fact that you are solo laning and you don't necessarily have a lot of support from your team, depending on the people you're playing with. If you're in there with randoms, a lot of people aren't good enough to understand that when the offlaner has to back for whatever reason, you know, the jungler or the mid laner can kind of rotate over to the left and just kind of keep an eye on the off lane, so that way the minions don't just start rushing to that first fort. So just being able to kind of get that Cyan buff and just give you some extra health and mana and just a little bit of gold and just a little bit of pretty much everything is really important. Again, the best time to take the Cyan is going to be either when you notice that the opponent's offlaner backs, or if you have a rotation. If your jungler comes over to cover your lane, so that way you can go ahead as the offlaner and do that buff. That is one thing that is very, very easy to do, but again, it takes a lot of communication, and when you're playing with randoms who are new players, they don't understand that. Same thing with the mid laner. The mid laner can also rotate over and kind of cover the lane while the offlaner goes and gets that buff really quick. A lot of rotations is very important, but you'll notice as the offlaner, you can't really go in there and do it solo, or, you know, you got to be careful because you're by yourself. And if the enemy sees you immediately doing it, they can just come over and have, you know, their jungler come over, and then it's a 2v1 and you kind of get smashed at that point. Now, a bonus tip is you're probably wondering, well, how do I know when these buffs are up and not? Now, new players are just going to kind of walk over to the area and they'll look and see the actual timer of how many seconds. But pro players will just look at their map and they will see that it has the little line around it. So for all of the buffs, the circle buffs, you'll see there's kind of like this this circle outlined around it, and that is the timer that indicates when that buff will be back up. So if it gets destroyed, you'll see that outside line start to show on that circle, and then once it is completely full, it'll be gone. So anytime you just see a regular circle, that means that the buff is active and it is up. And then whenever you kind of see this outline of what looks like a timer around that circle, that means that the buff is no longer there, and the timer is kind of ticking, and you got to wait until it completely fills. So pro players will keep an eye out on this and understand that when that buff is getting ready to refresh, they'll start making their way over to that area instead of kind of just wandering around. The map is pretty big, and movement is so important. You don't want to be wasting your time going to the left area and then you end up going back to the right, and then, you know what I mean? You want to make sure that all of your movement is calculated and you're getting value out of it. You never want to just be kind of wandering around the map not doing anything. Our next buff we have is going to be located in the jungle, and this is going to be Fangtooth. Now this is going to be represented by the brown circle. Now as a jungle player, you can go ahead and you can solo Fangtooth fairly easy. In fact, that's one of the priorities that you should be doing. However, it is something that you have to be very cautious about, because if the enemy team is good and they kind of set up some vision around Fangtooth, the moment they see you over there, they can easily just gank you, even just two players. One of the things that I like to do is know where everyone is. You always need to know where everyone's position is, how many people are dead on the team. So if I see that two people on the other team are destroyed and there's only actually 3 players alive on the other team, and I see 1 in one lane and 2 in another lane, I'm immediately going to Fangtooth as a jungler because it's easy. It's easy buffs. It helps out your entire team and it gives you a huge edge. When the other team is completely up, that is when it's kind of dangerous to go and do Fangtooth. Again, you got to be very careful. A good team is going to keep vision on that, so you're not going to be able to just run in there and solo it with a whole team up, because they will rotate over and gank you, especially if your team is kind of oblivious and they don't go over and help you out either. For the Fangtooth buff, it actually stacks up to 6 times, so you can go ahead and destroy Fangtooth over and over again as it is up to get extra buffs. The first time you kill Fangtooth, it will increase all of your buff durations. So your red buff, your blue buff, and also your river buffs. We're gonna go over the river buffs very shortly in a second, so stick around with me. Don't click off yet. It's a very long video with a lot of good information. Your second stack is going to increase your out of combat move speed. Now that is so important for the jungler. The jungler wants to get 2 stacks of Fangtooth because that means you can rotate so much faster. I mean, you just absolutely fly through the jungle rotating. So the second stack is so important. After that, it kind of just increases your stats gradually over a percentage. So at stack 3, you're going to get a 6% increase to all of your stats. The 4th time you kill Fangtooth, you'll get a 12% increase to all of your stats. The 5th time will go 18%. And finally, the 6th final time will give you a 24% increase to all of your stats. Next up, we have the other boss in the jungle. This is going to be the Orb Prime and Mini Prime. So the first 20 minutes, Mini Prime will be active. After 20 minutes of gameplay, that is when the big boy, the official Orb Prime boss monster, will appear. Mini Prime will give single player buffs though, so that is very important. Whoever gets the kill shot will get the single player buff. And what it does is it increases the damage you deal and the allied minions around you. So as a jungle player, this isn't really a buff that you want to get unless you're going to be lane pushing. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. This is better for like your off laner. So if your off laner can go ahead and do Mini Prime, and then as the jungler, you kind of help out. That's like the best case scenario, is to have the off laner and the jungler do it, but let the off laner actually get the buff. So as a jungler, you're just kind of there putting out some extra damage, monitoring the area, making sure your teammate doesn't get ganked. If your off laner gets the Mini Prime buff, I mean, they're gonna absolutely demolish that lane. Also, your mid laner is another option as well. If you have your mid laner go over there with your jungler to kind of help out. And then after those 20 minutes, the big boy Orb Prime will be summoned, and this will give your whole entire team buffs. So you're going to get a damage increase for everyone on your team. You're going to get an increase to out of combat healing, and you're also going to have an increase to your mana regeneration. Orb Prime is very strong late game. One thing that I also have to mention though is the fact that you should be doing big boy Orb Prime with almost your 5-man team. You can get away with doing it with like 4, but you really need a lot of people. And this is something you do when you have like a team wipe. So if you have like a big team battle, and let's say you wipe out like 3 of their team members, and they're down to only having like 2 live players, and the other 3 got like a 40-second cooldown before they resurrect. That is a great time for your team to kind of go over there and take down the big Orb Prime boss. 4 or 5 to do it, because you want to do it quick. You want to do it efficiently. You don't want to have people dying. I went and I tried to do it one time with noobs, and I think there was only like 3 of us, and I was like, guys, what are you doing? Don't do it. And sure enough, they ended up getting destroyed by Orb Prime, and we didn't even get the buff. And I was just kind of standing there watching, and I was like, oh my God, what are they doing? They wouldn't listen. So you don't want to have something like that happen. It is very punishing, and it really like turns the tide of the battle. Finally, we got our river buffs. Hopefully you sticked around. This is a really long, good video. Your river buffs, you have 2 of them. They're kind of represented by these white orbs that are right on the river. Now, the way to tell where is the river is the fact that if you look at the map, it is kind of like this lighter gray in the middle, and it kind of flows like a river. I'm going to point to it and kind of outline it so you have like a better understanding. There is a river buff on each side of you as the mid laner. So there's one on the left and one on the right, and they actually rotate with different buffs. This monster is fairly easy to take down. All you're going to see is this little like buzzing flying monster. And usually it only takes like 1 to 2 hits to destroy it and get the buff. If you see it glowing like a pink, that is going to give you ability damage when you destroy it. If you see it green, that's going to give you a shield. Orange is going to give you an increase to your attack speed. Finally, the gray is going to give you an increase to your move speed. The mid laner has the fastest access to the river buffs, because I mean, it's literally right next to the middle lane. All you got to do is kind of take a few steps to the left or right, and you can instantly get those buffs. So usually as the jungler, it's a good idea to kind of let your middle laner get one of those buffs. As a jungler, you don't want to be a hog. You don't want to go around and take all the buffs. I've seen people play as jungler and they'll get like the red buff, the blue buff, and then they'll go and they'll steal both of the river buffs, and then like you really screw your team. So that's another pro tip, is just as a jungler, don't hog all of the buffs. The river buffs will cycle every 3 minutes. So like the ones I just mentioned, every 3 minutes, they will go ahead and they will change. So you destroy them. However, if you don't destroy them, they will cycle every 2 minutes to the next buff. Well, let's say for instance that when we start off the game, the river buff right here is pink. After 2 minutes, if nobody takes that river buff, it will then go ahead and it will rotate to the next buff. So then it will become like a shield buff. But after you destroy it, then it is 3 minutes before it respawns, and then it will rotate to the next one. That is it. I hope you guys and girls enjoyed the video. Stay happy, stay safe, and I'll see y'all later. Peace.